Marcus Blackwood had ruled the vampire clans for over 3 centuries, commanding respect and fear across the supernatural world. His castle stood majestically on the cliffs of Romania, overlooking valleys shrouded in perpetual mist. For the past 5 years, he had been away on urgent business, settling territorial disputes between rival vampire houses across Europe and dealing with the growing threat of vampire hunters. The ancient stones of his castle had witnessed countless secrets, but none as profound as what awaited his return on this cold October evening. Marcus materialized at the castle gates, his long black coat billowing in the wind, his piercing blue eyes scanning the familiar grounds. Something felt different. There was a warmth in the air that hadn't existed before, a sense of life that seemed almost foreign to his centuries-old fortress. As he approached the main entrance, Marcus noticed subtle changes. Fresh flowers adorned the windowsills, something that had never been there during his rule. The harsh, Gothic atmosphere of his domain had somehow softened. The heavy wooden doors creaked open at his approach, responding to his supernatural presence as they always had. "Master Blackwood," gasped Elena, the head butler, nearly dropping the silver tray she carried. Her face went pale as she witnessed his unexpected arrival. We weren't expecting you, my lord." Marcus studied her carefully. Elena had served his family for decades, but there was something nervous in her demeanor, something she was clearly trying to hide. "I decided to return earlier than planned," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had made kingdoms tremble. "Tell me, what has transpired in my absence?" Elena's hands trembled slightly as she set down the tray. "Nothing unusual, my lord. The household has been maintained as always. The staff has been diligent in their duties." But Marcus's supernatural senses detected the lie immediately. His heightened hearing picked up sounds that shouldn't exist in his castle, the soft patter of small feet somewhere in the upper floors, muffled giggles that definitely didn't belong to any of his adult staff. His nostrils flared as he caught an unfamiliar scent, something sweet and innocent that made his centuries-old heart skip a beat. "Where is Isabella?" he asked suddenly, remembering the young maid he had hired shortly before his departure. Isabella Rodriguez had been a recent addition to his staff, a 23-year-old woman from a small village who needed work to support her ailing mother. She had impressed him with her dedication and fearless attitude, showing no terror in his presence unlike most humans. Elena's face grew even paler. She is in her quarters, my lord." "Shall I summon her?" "No," Marcus replied, his curiosity piqued. "I will find her myself." As he made his way through the familiar corridors, the sounds grew clearer. Children's laughter echoed from somewhere near the servants' quarters, along with a woman's gentle voice singing a Spanish lullaby. Marcus felt a strange emotion stirring within him, something he hadn't experienced in centuries. The melody was beautiful, filled with love and tenderness that seemed to warm even his cold, undead heart. Following the sounds, he found himself standing outside Isabella's quarters. The door was slightly ajar, and, through the gap, he could see inside. What he witnessed made him freeze in complete shock. Isabella sat on a simple wooden chair, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders as she held a small child in her arms. But it wasn't just one child, there were 3 of them. 3 beautiful toddlers, each appearing to be around 4 years old, all gathered around her. One sat on her lap while the other 2 played at her feet with simple wooden toys. The children were extraordinary. Even from his position in the doorway, Marcus could sense something supernatural about them. Their movements were too graceful for ordinary human children, their reflexes too quick. When one of the boys reached for a toy that was about to fall, he caught it with impossible speed. When the little girl laughed, her eyes flashed with a brief golden glow. "Mama, tell us the story about the Moon Prince again," pleaded one of the boys, his voice carrying a musical quality that made Marcus's ancient soul stir with recognition. "Si, mijo," Isabella replied softly, her voice filled with maternal love. "But, after this story, you 3 need to sleep. You know how important it is that no one discovers you." Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. These children, they couldn't be what he suspected, could they? As he watched, one of the children, a boy with striking dark hair and features that looked remarkably familiar, turned toward the door. His eyes, a brilliant blue that Marcus recognized from centuries of looking in mirrors, met his. "Mama," the child whispered, "someone's watching us." Isabella's head snapped toward the door, her brown eyes widening in terror as she saw the imposing figure of her master standing there. The color drained from her face completely, and she instinctively pulled all three children closer to her, her maternal instincts overriding her fear. "Master Blackwood," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I can explain." But Marcus couldn't speak. He was staring at three faces that bore unmistakable resemblances to his own features, combined with Isabella's gentle beauty. The boy who had spotted him had his exact eye color and the same aristocratic nose. The little girl possessed his strong jawline but Isabella's warm smile. The third child had his dark hair and the same intense gaze that had intimidated enemies for centuries. The implications hit him like a physical blow. 5 years ago, before he had left for Europe, there had been one night, one moment of weakness when the beautiful Maid had comforted him after news of a particularly brutal vampire hunter attack. They had shared wine, conversation, and, eventually, passion. He had convinced himself it was merely a moment of human comfort, nothing more. He had never imagined. "How old are they?" he asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. "For years," Isabella replied, her voice shaking as she tried to shield the children with her body. "Master, please, I never intended. I didn't know how to tell you. When you left so suddenly, I discovered I was pregnant, and then, when they were born." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that would confirm what Marcus already suspected. These weren't just his children, they were something unprecedented. Half vampire, half human hybrids, something that was supposed to be impossible according to centuries of vampire lore. "Mama, who is the scary man?" asked the little girl, her golden eyes flickering between her normal brown and something far more supernatural. He's your father, mi amor," Isabella whispered, the words hanging in the air like a bombshell. The children turned to study Marcus with newfound curiosity rather than fear. The boy who had first spotted him stood up with fluid grace that no human child should possess and took a step toward him. "Papa," he said tentatively, the word carrying power that made the very air in the room shimmer. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been frozen for centuries. These children, his children, were looking at him with innocent trust and curiosity. They weren't afraid of him, despite the aura of darkness and power that surrounded him. They simply saw him as their father. But the implications were staggering. If other vampire clans discovered the existence of these hybrid children, it could start a war. Some would see them as abominations to be destroyed, while others might view them as powerful weapons to be controlled. The Vampire Council would demand their immediate execution, viewing them as a threat to the purity of vampire bloodlines. "Isabella," he said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion, "why didn't you send word? Why didn't you tell me?" Tears began streaming down her face. "Because I was terrified," she admitted. "I knew what these children represented, what danger they would be in if anyone discovered them. I thought if I could raise them quietly, if I could teach them to control their abilities and hide what they were, maybe they could have a chance at life." "Their abilities?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to understand. "They're stronger than any human child should be, faster, more intelligent. They don't need as much sleep, and they can see in complete darkness. Sometimes their eyes glow when they're emotional, and they can sense things that others cannot. But they also have human hearts, human emotions. They love, they laugh, they cry. They're not monsters, Master Blackwood. They're just children who happen to be extraordinary." As if to prove her point, the little girl approached Marcus fearlessly and tugged on his long coat. "Papa, are you really our daddy? Mama showed us a picture of you, but you look much more handsome in person." Despite everything, despite the chaos this revelation would bring to his carefully ordered world, Marcus found himself smiling. He knelt down to the child's level, studying her face that was such a perfect blend of his features and Isabella's warmth. "What's your name, little one?" he asked gently. "I'm Sophia," she replied with a bright smile. "And that's my brother Diego, and that's my other brother Carlos. We've been waiting to meet you for a very long time." "Waiting for me?" "Mama told us that our papa was a very important man who had to go away to keep bad people from hurting others. She said that someday, when it was safe, you would come back and we could be a real family." Marcus looked up at Isabella, who was watching the interaction with tears in her eyes. She had clearly done everything possible to present him in a positive light to their children, despite having every reason to fear his reaction to their existence. "Master," Isabella said quietly, "I know this changes everything. I know you probably wish this had never happened. If you want us to leave, if you want to pretend we don't exist, I understand. I just ask that you give me enough time to find somewhere safe for them to live." The assumption in her words, that he would reject them, abandon them, cut deeper than any blade ever had. Marcus realized that Isabella had spent 5 years believing he would view their children as burdens or mistakes, living in fear of the day he might discover them and destroy the family she had built. "Leave," he repeated, standing slowly. "Isabella, these children are my heirs. They carry my blood, my legacy. Why would I ever want them to leave?" The hope that flickered in her eyes was almost painful to witness. "But, they're half-human. The Vampire Council would never accept them. Other clans would see them as abominations." "The Vampire Council," Marcus said with cold authority, "answers to me. And anyone who threatens my children will discover exactly why I have ruled for 3 centuries. Diego, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward. "Papa, does this mean we don't have to hide anymore? Can we really be a family?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. These children had spent their entire lives hiding, suppressing their true nature, living in fear of discovery. They had never known the freedom to simply exist as themselves. "Yes," he said firmly, making a decision that would change everything. "We are family. And families protect each other." As he watched his 3 children break into huge smiles and rush toward him for hugs, Marcus realized that his centuries of existence had been leading to this moment. Everything he had built, all the power he had accumulated, all the respect he had commanded, it had all been preparing him for the most important role of his immortal life. He was now a father. The following weeks brought unprecedented changes to Castle Blackwood. Marcus found himself experiencing emotions and challenges he had never encountered in his 3 centuries of existence. Being a father to half-vampire children was proving to be unlike anything the ancient texts had ever described, mainly because such children weren't supposed to exist. Diego, Carlos, and Sofia were extraordinary in every sense. They possessed supernatural abilities that manifested unpredictably, often at the most inconvenient moments. During their first family dinner, Carlos had accidentally crushed his wine goblet when he got excited about a story Marcus was telling. Sofia had somehow managed to become temporarily invisible when she was embarrassed, causing a frantic search throughout the castle until Isabella coaxed her back to visibility with promises of her favorite Spanish cookies. Diego, the eldest by mere minutes, displayed the most advanced abilities. He could sense emotions and, sometimes even surface thoughts from the castle staff. This led to an awkward situation when he innocently announced at breakfast that Elena, the head butler, was worried about her secret romance with Thomas, the stable master. "Children," Isabella said gently but firmly, "remember what we discussed about keeping other people's private thoughts private." "But, Mama," Diego protested, "Papa's emotions are so interesting. They're all mixed up, happy, scared, proud, confused. It's like a rainbow that keeps changing colors." Marcus nearly choked on his blood wine. The idea that his 4-year-old son could read his emotional state was both fascinating and terrifying. "Diego, can you hear everyone's thoughts, or just emotions?" "Mostly emotions," the boy replied thoughtfully. "But, sometimes, when people are thinking really loud thoughts, I can hear those too. Thomas was thinking very loud thoughts about Elena yesterday." Isabella covered her face with her hands while Marcus tried to maintain his composure. Parenting, he was discovering, required diplomatic skills that even centuries of ruling vampire clans hadn't prepared him for. The children's supernatural nature wasn't the only challenge. They were also remarkably intelligent, asking questions that would challenge university professors. Sofia wanted to know why the moon affected Papa's strength but not theirs. Carlos was fascinated by the castle's architecture and had somehow figured out that there were secret passages behind the walls. Diego had started reading the ancient vampire texts in the library and was asking uncomfortable questions about vampire politics and the historical treatment of humans. "Papa," Diego said one evening as Marcus was tucking him into bed, "why do the books say that vampires and humans are supposed to be enemies? You and Mama love each other, don't you?" The question caught Marcus off guard. In all his centuries, he had never questioned the traditional separation between vampires and humans. It was simply the way things had always been. But, watching Isabella with their children, seeing her strength, intelligence, and unwavering love, had made him reconsider many long-held beliefs. Sometimes, Mijo, he said carefully, the old ways aren't always the right ways. Your mother has shown me that humans and vampires can understand each other, can care for each other, in ways I never thought possible. Does that mean we're special because we're both? Marcus smiled, brushing Diego's dark hair from his forehead. You're special because you're yourselves. You have the best qualities of both worlds, and you'll grow up understanding both in ways that no one before you ever has. But their peaceful family time was about to be disrupted. 3 weeks after Marcus's return, a formal delegation from the European Vampire Council arrived at the castle. Marcus had been expecting this visit. News traveled fast in the supernatural world, and whispers of the vampire ruler's unexpected extended stay at his ancestral home had reached the wrong ears. The delegation was led by Countess Victoria Ashworth, a vampire nearly as old as Marcus himself and one of the few beings who dared to question his authority. She arrived with 3 other council members, their black carriage pulling up to the castle gates just as the sun was setting. Marcus met them in the great hall, dressed in his formal ceremonial robes, every inch the imposing ruler they expected. Isabella had taken the children to the far wing of the castle with strict instructions to remain hidden and quiet, no matter what they might hear. Marcus, Victoria said with cool formality, how delightful to see you again. We heard you had returned from your European business and decided to pay a visit. I hope you don't mind the unannounced arrival. Of course not, Marcus replied smoothly, though his heightened senses detected the subtle threat in her words. What brings the council to my home? Curiosity, primarily, said Councilman Edgar Rothwell, a pretentious vampire who had always resented Marcus's power. There have been interesting reports. Stories of changes in your household, unusual sounds, unfamiliar scents. Some of our informants have mentioned detecting the presence of, how shall I put this delicately, hybrid offspring. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Marcus's power flared in response to the thinly veiled threat. I'm afraid I don't understand what you're implying, Edgar. Victoria stepped forward, her red eyes gleaming with malicious interest. Oh, come now, Marcus. We've known each other for centuries. There's no need for games between us. We know about the children. The admission hung in the air like a sword suspended over Marcus's head. Someone had betrayed them, had reported the existence of his children to the council. His mind raced through the possibilities: which staff member had been turned against him, who had access to information about his family. Even if such children existed, Marcus said carefully, I fail to see how it would concern the council. My personal affairs have never been subject to outside interference. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, said Councilwoman Margaret Dubois, speaking for the first time. The creation of hybrid offspring violates the oldest laws of our kind. Such abominations threaten the purity of vampire bloodlines and could potentially expose our entire species to human discovery. Abominations? Marcus repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made the visiting vampires take a step back. You speak of matters you know nothing about. We know enough, Edgar said boldly, clearly emboldened by the group's numbers. The law is clear, Marcus. Half-breed children are to be eliminated immediately upon discovery, along with their human parent. It's been the rule for 1,000 years. The law, Marcus said, his power filling the room with an oppressive weight that made the ancient stones tremble, is whatever I say it is. I am the ruler here, not some outdated council of frightened old vampires who fear change. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. Even you cannot stand against 1,000 years of tradition, Marcus. These children represent a danger to everything we've built. What happens when they mature? What happens when other vampires discover that half-breeds are possible? It could start wars between our species, or worse, it could lead humans to discover our existence. Perhaps, Marcus said, moving with supernatural speed to position himself between the council members and the direction of his family's hiding place, the real danger lies in the narrow-minded thinking of those who fear evolution. But their heated discussion was interrupted by a sound that made Marcus's blood run cold, the patter of small feet running down the corridor, accompanied by Sophia's voice calling out, "Papa, Papa. Diego says there are scary people here, and Mama is crying." All eyes turned toward the entrance to the great hall as Sophia burst through the doorway, her golden eyes flashing with supernatural light as her emotions ran high. Behind her came Diego and Carlos, both moving with the fluid grace that marked their hybrid nature. The children stopped short when they saw the assembled vampires, their supernatural senses immediately detecting the danger in the room. Diego stepped protectively in front of his siblings, his young face set with determination that was heartbreaking in someone so small. "Papa," he said quietly, "these people want to hurt us, don't they?" The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria and the other council members stared at the children with a mixture of fascination and horror. The reality of half-vampire offspring was even more shocking than they had imagined. The children's beauty was otherworldly, their supernatural auras unmistakable, their intelligence clearly far beyond their apparent age. "Impossible," whispered Margaret. "They're so developed." "How old did you say they were?" "I didn't," Marcus replied coldly, moving to place himself between the council and his children. Victoria circled slowly, studying the children like a predator evaluating prey. 4 years old, at most. Yet look at them, the way they move, the power radiating from them, their awareness of the supernatural tension in this room. They're more advanced than vampire children twice their age. Because they're abominations, Edgar spat. Unnatural creatures that should never have been allowed to exist. The insult proved to be a mistake. Carlos, the most temperamental of the 3 children, felt his supernatural abilities flare in response to the hatred in Edgar's voice. The wine goblets on nearby tables began to crack, and several candles suddenly burst into much brighter flames. "Don't call us names," Carlos said, his young voice carrying undertones of power that made the adult vampires step backward in shock. "Carlos," Marcus said gently but firmly, "control your emotions, son. Don't let them see your full power." But it was too late. The council had witnessed enough to understand that these children represented something far beyond what they had imagined. These weren't weak half-breeds who would struggle with their dual nature, they were potentially more powerful than pure vampires. "This changes everything," Victoria said slowly. "If word of this spreads, if other vampires learn that half-human children can be this powerful, it could upset the entire balance of supernatural society," Edgar finished. "Marcus, surely you understand that we cannot allow this knowledge to leave this room." The threat was unmistakable. The council wasn't just talking about eliminating his children anymore, they were talking about eliminating anyone who knew about them, including members of his own household staff. "You seem to be under a misapprehension," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You believe you have a choice in this matter. You believe you can threaten my family and leave this castle alive." Isabella chose that moment to arrive, having heard the commotion from their hiding place. She took one look at the situation, her children standing defiantly in front of strange vampires, Marcus radiating lethal intent, the obvious threat hanging in the air, and immediately moved to gather the children behind her. "Mama," Sophia whispered, "the scary lady wants to hurt us." "I know, mi amor," Isabella said softly, though her voice carried a strength that surprised everyone in the room. "But your papa won't let that happen." Victoria turned her attention to Isabella with cruel interest. "So this is the human who seduced our mighty ruler. Tell me, girl, did you deliberately set out to corrupt Marcus with your half-breed spawn, or was it merely an accident?" The insult to Isabella proved to be the final straw. Marcus's careful control shattered completely. His power exploded outward, causing the massive stone walls to shake and several windows to shatter. When he spoke, his voice carried the full weight of 3 centuries of accumulated authority and barely controlled rage. "You will not," he said, each word precise and deadly, "speak to or about my family in that manner. Isabella is under my protection, as are my children. Any threat to them is a declaration of war against me personally." "Marcus," Victoria tried, clearly realizing she had pushed too far, "surely we can reach some accommodation." "The only accommodation," Marcus interrupted, "is your immediate departure from my lands and your sworn oath never to speak of what you've witnessed here. In exchange, I won't hunt down every member of your bloodlines and make them suffer for your insults to my family." The council members exchanged uncertain glances. They had come here believing they held the advantage, that they could force Marcus to eliminate his hybrid children through threats and ancient laws. Instead, they had discovered children more powerful than expected and a vampire ruler whose protective instincts had transformed him into something far more dangerous than the cold, calculating leader they thought they knew. "And if we refuse?" Edgar asked, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Marcus smiled, and every vampire in the room felt their ancient blood run cold at the expression. "Then, you'll discover exactly why I've ruled unopposed for 3 centuries, and why challenging me was the last mistake you'll ever make." Diego tugged on his father's coat. "Papa," he whispered, "you don't have to hurt them. I can make them forget about us." The suggestion stunned everyone into silence. Memory manipulation was an advanced vampire ability that most didn't develop for decades, if ever. Yet here was a 4-year-old half-vampire offering to solve their problem with powers that shouldn't exist. "Diego," Marcus said gently, "that's very brave, but you don't need to use your abilities to protect us." "But I want to help," the boy insisted. "They're scared of us because they don't understand. Maybe if they forgot about us, they could go back to being happy with their normal vampire lives." The wisdom in those words, coming from a child barely past toddlerhood, left the entire room speechless. Even Victoria seemed shaken by the compassion Diego was showing toward people who wanted to destroy his family. Marcus looked around the room, taking in his children's faces, Isabella's protective stance, and the council members' obvious uncertainty. A decision crystallized in his mind, one that would change not just their family's future, but, potentially, the entire supernatural world. "I'm going to give you a choice," he announced to the council. "You can leave now, swear the oath of silence I mentioned, and never speak of this again. Or..." He paused, letting the alternative hang in the air. "Or..." Victoria prompted. "Or you can stay, learn the truth about my children, and help me change the laws that have governed our kind for a millennium. Because whether you accept it or not, evolution has arrived in the vampire world, and you can either adapt or be left behind." The choice he offered would determine not just the immediate fate of his family, but the future of vampire society itself. And, as Marcus watched the council members struggle with their decision, he realized that his life as a traditional vampire ruler was over. He was now something entirely new, a father fighting for his children's right to exist in a world that saw them as impossibilities. The council's decision came after what felt like an eternity of tense silence. Victoria was the first to speak, her centuries of political experience evident in her carefully chosen words. "Marcus, what you're proposing, it would require overturning laws that have governed our species since before most of us were born. The resistance from other vampire houses would be enormous." "Then, we face that resistance together," Marcus replied, surprised to find Victoria actually considering his offer. "Or you leave now and pretend this never happened. But understand this, my children will not hide forever. They will grow up, they will develop their abilities, and, eventually, the world will know they exist. The question is whether vampire society will be prepared for that revelation or be destroyed by it." Edgar stepped forward, his expression still skeptical. "And what makes you think these children won't become a threat to pure vampires? What's to stop them from viewing us as inferior once they realize their enhanced abilities?" Diego, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation with an understanding far beyond his years, looked up at Edgar with those piercing blue eyes he had inherited from his father. "Because Mama taught us that being different doesn't make anyone better or worse," the boy said simply. "She said that people who think they're better than others are usually just scared of being different themselves." The profound wisdom in those words, delivered with a child's innocent honesty, seemed to hit Edgar like a physical blow. Marcus felt a surge of pride in his son's emotional intelligence and Isabella's influence on their children's moral development. Margaret stepped forward, studying the children with new interest. "Their emotional maturity is remarkable. Most vampire children their age are barely capable of controlling their bloodlust, yet these 3 show more restraint and wisdom than vampires I've known for centuries. That's their human heritage," Isabella said quietly, speaking to the council for the first time. "They have human hearts, human capacity for empathy and growth. But they also have vampire strength, vampire intelligence, vampire longevity. They could be bridges between our worlds instead of weapons against either." Carlos tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Papa, can I show them something?" Something that might help them understand? Marcus looked down at his son, curious about what the boy had in mind. What do you want to show them, Carlos? The garden trick, Carlos said with a shy smile. The one that makes Mama happy when she's sad. Intrigued despite herself, Victoria nodded. Very well. Show us. Carlos led the group to the large windows overlooking the castle's courtyard. The garden below was dormant in the autumn cold, bare earth and skeleton trees creating a bleak landscape. The boy placed his small hands against the glass and closed his eyes in concentration. What happened next defied every law of vampire nature that the council members thought they knew. A warm, golden light began emanating from Carlos's hands, spreading across the glass and somehow extending beyond it to touch the garden below. Where the light reached, flowers began to bloom, roses, lilies, daffodils, creating a riot of color and life in the dead of winter. Impossible, whispered Margaret. Vampires cannot create life. We are creatures of death and darkness. But he's not just vampire, Sophia chimed in proudly. He's human too, and humans create beautiful things all the time. The display lasted only a few minutes before Carlos stepped back, slightly tired but smiling at the beauty he had created. The garden below remained transformed, blooming flowers providing a stark contrast to the dark castle walls. How? Victoria asked, her voice filled with wonder rather than skepticism for the first time. We don't know exactly, Isabella admitted. Each of them manifests different abilities. Diego can sense emotions and, sometimes thoughts. Sophia can become invisible and move objects without touching them. Carlos can bring life to growing things and sense the health of living creatures. They're developing powers that combine the best aspects of both vampires and humans. Edgar, who had been silent since Diego's earlier rebuke, finally spoke. The implications are staggering. If other supernatural species learn of this, werewolves, witches, demons, it could upset the entire balance of power in our world. Which is exactly why we need to be prepared, Marcus said. These children are not an accident or an anomaly. They're evolution. And evolution doesn't ask permission. Victoria began pacing, her political mind clearly working through the ramifications. If we were to support this, if we were to change the ancient laws, we would need ironclad proof that these children pose no threat to vampire society. We would need guarantees of their loyalty, their discretion, their humanity, Isabella interrupted firmly. What you're asking for are the very qualities that make them special. They don't need to prove their worthiness to exist. They already are worthy, simply by being themselves. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the windows, they could see torches approaching the castle gates, dozens of them, carried by what appeared to be an angry mob of vampires from various houses. What is this? Marcus demanded, his protective instincts immediately activated. Elena burst into the room, her face pale with terror. Master Blackwood, there are vampires at the gates demanding entrance. They're led by Lord Maximilian Drackle, and they're calling for the immediate surrender of the abominations. Marcus felt rage building in his chest like a physical force. Somehow, word of his children had spread beyond the council. Other vampire lords had learned of their existence and had come to enforce the ancient laws through violence. How many? He asked tersely. At least 50, my lord, representing a dozen different houses. Victoria cursed under her breath. Maximilian has been seeking an excuse to challenge your authority for decades. If he can position himself as the defender of vampire purity, he can claim leadership of the vampire world by eliminating my line, Marcus finished grimly. The political brilliance is obvious, even if it means murdering children. Diego stepped forward, his young face set with determination that was heartbreaking to witness. Papa, let us help. We're stronger than they think we are. Absolutely not, Marcus said firmly. You are children. Your job is to be safe, not to fight battles. But we can't be safe if bad vampires want to hurt us just for existing, Sophia pointed out with 4-year-old logic that cut straight to the heart of the matter. Isabella moved to gather the children closer to her. There must be another way. Violence will only prove their point, that we're dangerous, that we don't belong in their world. Sometimes, Edgar said slowly, surprising everyone with his thoughtful tone, the only way to prove you belong is to refuse to be driven away. The sound of the castle's main gates being forced open echoed through the stone halls. Maximilian Drakel's voice boomed from the courtyard below, magically amplified to reach every corner of the castle. Marcus Blackwood. You stand accused of violating the most sacred laws of our kind. Surrender the abominations and their human mother for immediate execution, and your own punishment may be limited to exile rather than death. Marcus moved to the window, looking down at the assembled vampires. Maximilian stood in the center, a tall figure in elaborate robes, surrounded by the representatives of vampire houses that had apparently decided to challenge Marcus's rule through this attack on his family. You have 1 hour, Maximilian continued, to comply with the demands of vampire law. If you refuse, we will take them by force, and your castle will burn as a warning to any others who might consider such perversions of our nature. Marcus turned back to the room, his mind racing through options. He could fight, his power was legendary, and his castle was designed to be defensible. But 50 vampires, including several ancient lords, would be a formidable force. And any battle would put his children at risk. There is another option, Victoria said quietly. A formal challenge. Marcus looked at her with interest. Explain. Ancient law allows for disputes over leadership to be settled through formal combat. If you were to challenge Maximilian directly, winner takes all, leadership of the vampire world, the right to set new laws, the authority to determine the fate of your children. Single combat? Marcus asked. Not exactly. The challenged party gets to set the terms. Maximilian could demand that it be a battle between champions, or a contest of abilities, or even. She paused, an idea forming in her expression. What? Isabella demanded. A test of the very thing being disputed. If the question is whether half-vampire children deserve to exist, perhaps the test should involve demonstrating their value to vampire society. Edgar caught on to her thinking. A demonstration of their abilities, their potential contribution, their capacity for wisdom and restraint. You're suggesting we put 4-year-old children on trial for their right to live, Isabella said, her voice tight with outrage. I'm suggesting we give them the opportunity to prove what we already know, Victoria replied. That they represent the future of our species, not its destruction. Marcus considered the proposal. It was risky, putting his children in front of hostile vampires, asking them to perform under pressure, gambling their lives on the political whims of beings who had already decided they wanted them dead. But it was also an opportunity. If his children could demonstrate their remarkable abilities, their wisdom, their potential for good, it might change minds that seemed unchangeable. What kind of test? He asked. Margaret stepped forward. 3 challenges, 1 for each child, designed to test different aspects of what it means to be vampire. Physical ability, mental capacity, and moral character. If they can prove themselves in all 3 areas, the assembled vampire lords would have to acknowledge their right to exist, Victoria finished. It's risky, but it's also the only way to settle this matter permanently without bloodshed. Marcus looked at his children, who had been listening to the adult conversation with their unnaturally mature understanding. What do you think? He asked them, believing they deserved a voice in decisions about their fate. Diego spoke first. If we prove we're not scary, will they leave us alone? If you prove you're valuable to our world, they'll have to accept you as part of it, Marcus replied honestly. Carlos nodded seriously. I want to try. I want them to see that we're good. Sophia looked up at her mother. Mama, are you scared? Isabella knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes. I'm terrified, mi amor. But I'm also proud of how brave you all are. Then, we'll do it, Sophia declared. We'll show them that being different can be wonderful. Marcus made his decision. Very well. But, I set one condition: if any of them fail any test, if this becomes about humiliation rather than demonstration, the deal is off and we settle this through combat. Victoria nodded. Agreed. I'll go negotiate the terms with Maximilian. As the Countess left to arrange the formal challenge, Marcus gathered his family together. In a few hours, his children would face a trial that would determine not just their right to exist, but, potentially, the future direction of vampire society. Whatever happens, he told them, remember that you are loved, you are valuable, and you have already changed our world for the better simply by existing. The next few hours would determine whether the change would be embraced or violently rejected by the ancient powers that ruled the night. But, as Marcus looked at his extraordinary children, brave, wise, powerful, and compassionate beyond their years, he felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries of existence: hope for a future that could be better than the past. The formal challenge was set for midnight, under the full moon, with representatives from every major vampire house as witnesses. His children would face 3 tests that would determine not just their fate, but the fate of every supernatural hybrid that might be born in the future. The vampire world was about to change forever, one way or another.